Good day, everyone. My name is Charlo de la Cruz, and I'm the representative or the reporter from the Chapter 5 discussion team. I'll be talking about the Chapter 5, which is the ethics of utilitarianism. To begin with, let's define utilitarianism. What is utilitarianism? Utilitarianism is an ethical theory of morality which is labeled as consequentialist. When we say consequentialist, it focuses on the outcomes, the results, or other possible effects of the actions that we are doing. So rather than the motive or intention of the act or the act itself, a good behavior can be considered a good behavior which is based on the possible outcomes of the act. So unlike the natural law, it disregards the act itself as the basis of morality. So basically, under utilitarianism, no action itself is good or bad depending on the outcome. You can say that an action is bad, like stealing, when the outcome is good, like helping the poor. Well, that's really the reality of utilitarianism. The means can be justified by the ends. Utilitarianism has a characteristic or this specific element which emphasizes the feeling of pleasure, satisfaction, happiness, contentment from doing an act. This is what we call ethical hedonism. Why are we acting like this? Why do we have to do this? Because we wanted to be happy, we wanted to be satisfied, we wanted to be contented as a result of every actions that we do. Under the element of ethical hedonism, the primary reason for living is for pleasure or happiness and to avoid pain and sufferings as much as possible. Because who would do an action that will cause them pain, that will cause them to suffer? We are doing acts to be satisfied, to be contented, and to be happy. Therefore, under utilitarianism, we must avoid those actions that may result from our sufferings or unhappiness.
According to Jeremy Bentham in the Introduction to the Principles of Morals and Legislation, nature has placed mankind under the governance of two sovereign masters, pain and pleasure. It is for them alone to point out what we ought to do, as well as to determine what we shall do.
There is a controversial utilitarian phrase by Francis Hutcheson, who is a Scottish philosopher. Greatest good for the greatest number. It has emphasis on the social dimension of happiness. This is common in situations like in the government. If their policies, for example, has positive results to many, the amount of unhappiness somehow from happiness should be measured. Don't you know that Jeremy Bentham invented this measurement?
Bentham's Hedonic Calculus or cost-benefit analysis. Hedons is a Greek term means pleasure. Calculus is a science of calculation. It is used for determining morality by measuring the exact amount of pleasure and pain, happiness and unhappiness.
So let's discuss the hedonic calculus. First, we have the intensity. This is the more intense the pleasure, the better. Which actions will provide us more satisfaction, more contentment, or more happiness? Second, we have duration. This is the longer the pleasure lasts, the better. We seek for actions that will provide us longer experience of pleasure. Third, we have certainty. The more certain the pleasure, the better. We look for actions or we act to find those actions or possibilities of having pleasure. Fourth, we have propinquity. The nearer, closer, or more often that pleasures occur, the better. These are actions that we are looking for immediate pleasures. Fifth, we have fecundity. The greater the possibility that the pleasure that one can derive from an act will be followed by more pleasures, the better. So this part, we are looking for a series of pleasure. What action will provide us a series of pleasure? A pleasure after another pleasure. Or the things that will make it happier, will make us happier from another action. Sixth, we have purity. The purer the pleasure, the better. It means that this pleasure from an action must not have any signs coming from pain. Or in a situation like you are gaining pleasure from abusive treatment, that is not purer pleasure. So we look for purity. The purer the pleasure, the better. No abusive, no pain, no suffering. Seventh and lastly, we have extent. The greater the number of people who can experience pleasure, the better. It means that you are not only the one who is happy or satisfied or contented by the act that you are doing, you are also making other people happy. And this is an example, learning or studying.
Strengths of utilitarianism. General emphasis on the greatest good for the greatest number. Utilitarian view that humans seek what is pleasurable has been empirically observed and tested. Its capacity to have universal application. The categorization of pleasures into higher and lower. The hedonic calculus. The primary consideration of the consequences of actions. Simplicity for making ethical decisions. A great deal of flexibility and sensitivity to the particular circumstances surrounding an action, finds various practical and specific applications not just in the field of morality and ethics. It considers one's well-being of equal value with everyone else. Weaknesses of utilitarianism. Obvious difficulty of knowing the exact consequences of our actions justifies the doing of something wrong as long as many will be happy. It would be impractical since we simply do not have time in all situations to weigh the pleasure or pain from the act. The greatest good of greatest number does not give justice to the rights of minority. Simply ignores the role of motive or intention. It rejects all forms of moral duties that we usually accept. Making goodness is only a matter of individual taste and personal preference. What is happiness or pleasurable for one may not be for the other. It is a heartless ethical philosophy, and all of man's actions are purposive is false.
All in all, when we are talking about the ethics of utilitarianism, we are focusing on the outcomes, the results, or the possible effects of the actions to consider if the action itself is good or bad. Though it has so many points, it also has some important flaws that needed to be considered because at the same time, there is no perfect theory at all. I hope you learned something and thank you for listening.